Welcome you all here today for this important and timely press conference. Vladimir Putin, world's #1 terrorist, implications for U.S. policy. I would like to thank Senator Shaheen and her staff who are with us here today for sponsoring this event, and the American Coalition for Ukraine for partnering with the Remembrance Society on this event that is taking place as part of the Ukraine Action Summit happening here in Washington this week. And I want to commend all of the activists who are with us in this room who have traveled from all over the country to be here this week. And I would also like to especially thank Sarah Chudzinski and Anna Berezniak on the ACU team, and Marta Federau and Ann Smith, who serve on the TRS Advisory Council, for their help with organizing this event. I now have the great pleasure to introduce the founding chairman of the Remembrance Society, former Congressman Don Ritter, who is going to frame the discussion that will take place here today and its importance at this moment in history for the West and for the free world. Don Ritter is the most dedicated anti-communist that I know. He has fought tirelessly against communism for the past 40 years as a businessman, as an activist, and in the halls of Congress, serving the state of Pennsylvania for 14 years. While he was in the U.S. House of Representatives, Don was ranking member of the U.S. Helsinki Commission. He was the founding co-chair of the Baltic States Ukraine Caucus, and also founding co-chairman of the Congressional Task Force on Afghanistan. Congressman Ritter served on the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation Board of Trustees for 20 years, and in 2024 founded the Remembrance Society. Don worked to promote the freedom of the Afghan people for 40 years, beginning with the invasion of the Soviet Union in 1979, and he is also the president and CEO emeritus of the Afghan Chamber of Commerce. Over to you, Congressman Ritter.
Well, I want to thank Christina for all the work she's put in. She's one of the great staffers of all time, and I think many of you know that. You got a staffer. She is founding executive director and a trustee as well of the Remembrance Society. So I want to also welcome all of you here today and say a few words about the Remembrance Society. It's really important that we don't forget about the past, that we call attention to the travesties of totalitarian rule, which have led to the suffering of so many individual human beings. We must remember them. If we forget them, we will have forgotten how to understand the past and see the present for what it is and the future for what it could be or not. It's so important that we have decided to partner with the American Coalition for Ukraine, ACU, in putting on this important event. We chose very carefully to focus on America's negotiating partner, Vladimir Putin, a man bathed in blood, but not quite recognized by the American people. A lot of people continue to think of him as a defender of family values, Christianity, anti-wokeness. Nothing could be further from the truth. And that's why we're gathered here today. Again, I'd like to introduce or thank the ACU and introduce Mariana Tretiak. Mariana is the one of the founders of the Ukrainian National Women's Association. All right, that's a mouthful. Ariana, And Ariana brings to us a capacity that she developed in the entertainment industry, and where she then became an activist upon the breakout of the war in 2014, and she was a co-founder of that organization. She also started the advocacy committee for that organization, and advocacy has never been more important than now, as members of Congress are making their minds up about what to do about Ukraine. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce, and is now chairman of the board of the American Coalition for Ukraine. Ariana, please.
Good afternoon. Thank you everyone for being here. It is an honor to stand before you as the chair of the American Coalition for Ukraine, the ACU, and as a representative of the executive board of the Ukrainian National Women's League of America. Unfortunately, I can't take credit for their founding because we're celebrating 100 years this year of our historic organization, but advocacy. I can take the credit for founding and for leading our advocacy committee and bringing our organization to the fore in advocacy for Ukraine. I also stand here as a representative of the American Coalition, a coalition that not only represents Ukrainians, but many others who have suffered under the genocidal regime of Vladimir Putin. Our members include Georgians who still mourn the loss and the ethnic cleansing of Abkhazia, Syrians who have endured unimaginable horrors, Belarusians fighting for freedom, and American mothers whose sons gave their lives defending Ukraine's sovereignty. And, of course, we have many, many, many members and advocates who have Ukrainian family who is still suffering every day under the constant ballistic missile and drone attacks of Russia, and who have family who are fighting on the front lines in Ukraine. I'm a very proud first-generation Ukrainian American. My family came here after World War II, but we left many, many, many family members behind. And I grew up hearing stories of their oppression that my family endured under Soviet rule. My great uncle, my grandmother's brother, was a priest, a Catholic priest, who was sent to a gulag for his faith. We have whispered stories of a whole branch of our family who perished in the Holodomor, like many others, a genocide that sought to erase Ukraine's identity through starvation. These personal tragedies are part of a broader history of suffering and oppression that generations of Ukrainians have endured under Russian imperialism, whether it's the Tsars, Stalin, or now Vladimir Putin. In the 1990s, there was a hope that freedom might finally prevail for this region in the country. Yet, Putin's rise to power has brought back Russia's imperial ambitions with devastating consequences. He seeks to restore the genocidal Soviet Union in all of its forms and uses the same brutal tactics as his predecessors, denying nations their right to self-identification and sovereignty. Today, we are gathered here to send a clear message. America must leave no room in its foreign policies for genocidal dictators. To do otherwise would betray our values and would jeopardize our own security. I'm proud to join this press conference alongside so many brilliant minds committed to justice and freedom. Together, we will make it clear. America must stand firmly against tyranny and support those fighting for their independence and dignity. Thank you.
Yeah. NATO encroachment is not why Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine. Let's make that very clear. Freedom. Free peoples living next door. That's what did it. I'd like to right now introduce a gentleman who for decades has been a staunch supporter of Ukraine. Governor, Ambassador Jim Gilmore served his country at the height of the Cold War. He was a U.S. Army intelligence officer in Europe. James Gilmore came back. He got involved in politics, won some statewide races, including being elected to the office of Attorney General of the state of Virginia. He was then elected to the office of Governor of the state of Virginia. In the first Trump administration, he served as ambassador to the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, and has been a staunch, again, supporter of Ukraine now for decades. Jim Gilmore, Governor. Jim will be our moderator for today's program.
Congressman Ritter, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here and to moderate this day and to bring to you very distinguished persons who you've already heard from, and we want to congratulate the Remembrance Society and also the Ukrainian organizations who are here represented here today to say the things that need to be said about this war. I was the one, by the way, who was 5 minutes late. This was not the day to be in an Uber with someone who couldn't speak any English. And I ended up in Maryland, which is somewhat safer than Ukraine today. And but finally, I did get here. So I'm happy to have a chance to really talk about this for just a couple of minutes and then begin some introductions for some people that you really need to hear from. Yes, I was the United States Ambassador to the OSCE, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, which is headquartered in Vienna, Austria, and I was there as the United States Ambassador under the first Trump administration. My wife and I lived in Vienna, Austria for about 2 years. I had the honor and privilege of representing the United States at the Permanent Council meetings, which were held every Thursday in the Hofburg Palace, where every country had an opportunity to say what it thought was important. And as United States representative, I stood firmly behind Ukraine during that time. The Russian ambassador, who is a member of the OSCE, along with the other 56 other ambassadors and countries, was there, and he and I were in constant dialogue back and forth. The Ukraine ambassador was always there. I met with the Ukraine ambassador every week, personally, during that period of time. And I am very keenly aware that Ukraine is a sovereign country. And by its background, it is right and ought to be a sovereign country. Now, after I came back from Vienna, I had an opportunity to visit Kyiv and actually took a train down to, at that time, Mariupol before the invasion occurred, and went out on the Sea of Azov with the Ukrainian Navy and had a chance to really understand what people had to say. And what the Ukrainian representatives, all of them, said during my visit, both individual people and also government officials, was that they were Ukrainians. They were not Russians. They didn't intend to be Russians. And they were intending to have a sovereign, independent country, and they were looking forward to an opportunity to join with the West and to do what was necessary to advance their citizens as an independent country. Now, of course, a free country is always a threat to an authoritarian country. And what do we have there? We had the threat to Vladimir Putin, that he would be leading a country as an authoritarian dictator, and that there would be a former Soviet republic, a former country that was now enjoying freedom and Western opportunities and values, and that would be a bad example for any dictator that wanted to try to keep his control. So OSCE had representatives in eastern Ukraine before the invasion. We saw the conquest of Crimea, but then the invasion occurred. And so what have we seen now? The greatest possible terror and violence that you can imagine. The atrocities, the warfare, the violation of every principle of the OSCE and of all of Western civilization. The principle that a country has a right to exist and to govern its own future and not be invaded and conquered by any other neighboring country, anywhere. And he is in violation of all of those fundamental principles of the OSCE. Even though Russia continues to be a part of the OSCE, they are upbraided in the Permanent Council because of the violation by their government and the horrible war crimes that Vladimir Putin has led them to committing. Every day we see the attacks that go on. We see the missiles that are striking in Kyiv and all across the rest of Ukraine as well. Civilian people are being killed, murdered. Children are dying. It's a terrible situation. One thing that I've learned over my lifetime is that individual people matter. If they're killed and they're gone, particularly little children who never have an opportunity to grow up and fulfill what their lives could be, they don't get to be just a statistic on the page, as one time Joseph Stalin said. They, in fact, are people. They are individuals who are gone, and their relatives know they're gone. In the case of children, often their parents know they're gone, and they will never come back. And this is the meaning of what this horrible Russian invasion is, and the horrible war crimes that are being committed each and every day. So as the former United States ambassador to OSCE, I felt it would be useful, the Russians are doing it again, trying to turn the lights out. I thought it was vital that I have an opportunity to be here and participate in this press conference and to be a part of this today, and I'm grateful for the invitation to do that. Now, it's my privilege to introduce a couple of videos from some members of the United States Congress, former members of the United States Congress, who are going to say a few words by video. Now, this is going to be Congressman Steny H, who I'm well acquainted with, and a member of the other party that I'm not a member of, so this just demonstrates that this is a bipartisan event, and also Congressman Bacon. This emphasizes that this is bipartisan, and the presentations reflect the perspective from both sides of the aisle, and mention that a number of members of Congress are unable to participate here because of conflicts, including Helsinki Commission co-chairs. I would remind everyone that the United States Congress has a separate Helsinki Commission, and their representatives go to Vienna at least once a year, or to other countries, to other cities where the Parliamentary Assembly is being held, to participate in OSCE parliamentary activities. One of the commission co-chairs is Senator Wicker, Roger Wicker, and also from the House, Congressman Wilson. And both have committee hearings today, unfortunately, and some other Congress people could not come either, but they send their best wishes, and by their activities, we know their support in this moment, and you see what they say each and every day in the papers. Congressman Hoyer is the most senior member of the House of Democratic Caucus. He served in the House for more than 42 years and has served as Majority Leader twice. Congressman Hoyer is a widely respected voice in foreign policy and international affairs in Congress. And as the former chair and ranking Democrat on the Helsinki Commission, he championed the cause of human rights and individual freedoms and democracy and religious liberties throughout the world, in accordance with OSCE principles and, frankly, the principles of Western civilization that has been set down over the decades. Congressman Hoyer is a steadfast supporter for aiding Ukraine in the wake of this Russia's attempted annexation of Crimea and subsequent invasion of Ukraine in February of 2022. So, Congressman Ritter, shall we do that video first and then introduce, or shall we introduce both at the same time?
We can introduce both.
Then I'll do that. Representative Bacon is going to be the second video. Now, Representative Bacon is a retired Brigadier General of the United States Air Force and was elected to the House of Representatives in 2016. He serves on the House Armed Services Committee and chairs the Subcommittee on Cyber Information Technologies and Innovation. He's the co-chair of the House Baltic Caucus, and I had an opportunity to visit Lithuania, as a matter of fact, myself, and listen to them. And they know exactly what the danger is for the future if this thing goes wrong in Ukraine. He's a staunch supporter of Ukraine, has penned excellent op-eds, including one for the New York Times, on why Ukraine is a deeply American and Republican issue. So I will introduce these videos by saying this to you. The danger in the future is severe if Putin is allowed to commit a conquest here in the 21st century. The danger is not only to Ukraine, it isn't even only to the rest of Europe. It is in the long run a danger to the United States of America, which is why I am involved and why I'm so pleased to introduce these two videos.
Good afternoon. I'm Steny H, Congressman from Maryland's 5th District and the former Majority Leader of the United States House of Representatives and a former co-chair of the Commission on Security and Cooperation in Europe. I thank the American Coalition for Ukraine and the Remembrance Society for organizing this summit. And I regret I can't join you in person today. My wife Elaine is having surgery today. Your conversation today could not be more important. It's about the dictator responsible for starting this war with his criminal, unprovoked invasion of Ukraine. It is about the war criminal who has massacred civilians in Bucha and beyond. It's about the terrorist who killed his own people to consolidate power. And it is about the greatest obstacle to peace in this war, Vladimir Putin. Donald Trump has tried to appease Putin. Trump has withdrawn American support for international investigations into Russia's war crimes. He has parroted absurd Russian propaganda that somehow Ukraine initiated this war. He calls on Ukraine to cede its sovereign territory to Putin, while also disparaging Ukraine's aspirations for NATO membership, which I believe is the only way to assure Ukraine's security. What has Putin conceded in return? And the answer to that is nothing. Putin refuses President Trump's modest request, far too modest in my opinion. The Kremlin rejected Trump's latest ceasefire proposal, saying it failed, and I quote, to resolve the root causes of this conflict. In Putin's mind, that means wiping out any trace of sovereign, democratic Ukraine off the map and restoring the Soviet empire. Just the other day, Putin boasted, and I quote, "There are reasons to believe that we will finish the Ukrainians off." He said Russia is persistently and confidently moving toward achieving all of the goals stated at the beginning of this special operation, as he calls it. Those are not the words of someone who wants peace. Putin has already violated the UN Charter, the Helsinki Final Act, the 1994 Budapest Memorandum, the Minsk Agreements, and numerous other international laws and treaties over the decades. History and Putin's repeated actions clearly show he is not to be trusted. Neville Chamberlain did not secure peace in his time by appeasing Hitler. Donald Trump in the West will not secure peace for Ukraine or for us by appeasing Putin. A peace agreement that fails to guarantee Ukraine's security is not a peace agreement at all, just an opportunity for Russia to recover, rearm, and reinvade. This war started on a dictator's terms. We must ensure that it ends on democracy's terms, for the sake not only of Ukraine, not only America, but for the entire free world. I want to thank all of you for working to that end. All the freedom-loving democracies of the world must continue their financial, intelligence, and moral support for Ukraine until freedom's fight is won. Retreating in the face of tyranny must not be an option. If Ukraine loses, freedom loses.
Vladimir Putin is a terrible dictator. He's killed all his rivals for power. They've been thrown off of buildings, poisoned. Some of them killed us in gulags. He invaded his neighbor, Ukraine. It was a war of choice. He wanted to restore his old borders from prior to the collapse of the Soviet Union. He's afraid that Ukraine is going to be the successful democracy, free market economy with rule of law. And if Ukraine can do it, why can't Russia do it? And he saw that as a moral threat. And so the invasion of Ukraine is one of the worst acts of terrorism. Cities are being bombed. Just last night, the city was bombed and about 15 people were killed, innocent citizens, just for being Ukrainian. And so Russia doesn't mind indiscriminately bombing cities. The areas that they've controlled, they've murdered, they've raped, they've murdered POWs that they've captured. It's really a disgusting situation, war crime after war crime, and it's been directed by Putin himself. He is the #1 terrorist in the world, and I am a Republican that believes that we got to stand by our ally, Ukraine, and that independent, free Ukraine is our national security interest, and I'll always stand that way.
Now, we're going to have a panel discussion. We're going to introduce 5 people to come up onto our panel and make presentations. But first, I'm going to take the privileges moderator to do a special request, and that is Marta Federal, who I think wants to make an introduction to one of the panelists. And Marta, if you please come forward and say a few words.
It has been an honor and a pleasure to work with my congressman, former Congressman Don Ritter from way back. Congressman Don Ritter was a steadfast supporter of Ukraine, having spent time in Ukraine when he was a student at MIT. And at that time, it was amazing to hear of an American who knew so much about Ukraine and the Baltic states. And I remember that Congressman Don Ritter was the co-founder with Marcy Kaptur of the Ukraine Caucus. And it's been a pleasure for all these years. At this time, I chair the Return Ukraine's Children initiative of the Ukrainian National Women's League of America. And when Congressman Ritter turned to me and told me about this event that they are planning, the Remembrance Society, I said, of course I would help. So it's my honor now to introduce Mikhailina Skorik-Shkarivska, President of the NGO Institute for Sustainable Development of Communities, Bucha 2023, Deputy Mayor of Bucha in 2020, from 2022 to 2023, and a community development specialist and communications expert. I knew of Mikhailina Skorik-Shkarivska as the former deputy mayor of Bucha. She was there during the horrible tragedy. And when I met her and asked her to come to speak to this audience about the atrocities that Putin has done, I was amazed that she said, of course I will come and I will talk about it, because it's very hard, but people need to know it. I can just relate quickly. My son has a good friend who served in Afghanistan, came back. He will not talk about the atrocities of war that he saw there. He just cannot. And yet this lady has the strength to come and to talk about the horrors that she witnessed. It's an honor.
Just need to get her to the right chair.
There you go.
You're very good. Very good. Marta, thank you very much for that. That was very well delivered and heartfelt. And did you say that Congressman Ritter went to MIT?
He did.
Who knew? It's very impressive. The other members of the panel now, I will be happy to introduce. We'll start with David Satter. David Satter is a journalist, historian, the author of 6 books on Russia and the Soviet Union. He's a documentary film director. He serves as vice chairman of the Remembrance Society. He's known by his writings, his speeches, his podcasts, and he has a unique perspective on the danger of Russia and Vladimir Putin, the war criminal. In particular, and the importance of sovereign Ukraine to America and the West. A former Moscow correspondent of the Financial Times of London, he's followed Russian events for almost 5 decades in Moscow. 3 months later, from September 2013, he was expelled from Russia, becoming the first U.S. correspondent to be barred from Russia since the Cold War. David, please join us at the table. Alexander Matvichuk is a Ukrainian human rights lawyer and civil society leader who serves as the director of the nonprofit organization Center for Civil Liberties, which received the Nobel Peace Prize in 2022. Since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, her organization has recorded more than 80,000 war crimes committed by the Putin regime. It's more than just numbers. Alexandra and her organization team are recording the names and personal stories of that vast number of victims, which, as I've said in my remarks, each and every person of the 80,000 is not just a statistic, they're real people, each one. Her work is the work of the Remembrance Society on a grand scale. Alexandra. Alex Juriki?
Close enough.
Close. Tell me. Juriki. Yes, indeed. Is a former American prisoner of war in Russia. After 9/11, Alex joined the U.S. Army, where he served for 12 years, including 2 tours of duty in Iraq. Alex went to Ukraine after the invasion to help the Ukrainians defend their democracy, and after several months training Ukrainian soldiers, he was captured, beaten, and tortured by Russian soldiers and held hostage for 105 days. Alex, please join us. Ry Barkott is the co-founder and CEO of With Honor, a nonprofit and political action committee that recruits, elects, and supporting veterans who pledge to serve with integrity, civility, and courage across party lines. Together, the With Honor Action, 50 members of Congress in passing legislation, including laws focusing on strengthening NATO and combating illegal Russian aggression. Barkott is a Marine Corps veteran and author of It Happened on the Way to War. He's a Harvard Business School and Harvard Kennedy School graduate and co-founder of the investment firm Double Time Capital. Ry, please come forward if you would. We'll begin with David Satter. David. Your preference, you have a mic or you can speak from here.
I'll speak from here, simply so I can see everyone. It's harder to do that if I'm seated there. Well, I'm very glad to be here, and of course it's terribly important right now for us to impress upon American public opinion that this is not a trivial dispute that is involved in the war between Russia and Ukraine, but actually a fundamental question of values and way of life. it's been said by American officials that, but certainly by Russians, that President Zelensky is illegitimate. Our president even suggested that he was a dictator. Illegitimate is a word that is more appropriate for Putin, and not just illegitimate recently. His regime has been illegitimate from the moment of its creation because it owes its origin to an act of terror against ordinary Russians. My good friend Yevgeny Sevastyanov, the former head of the FSB in Moscow, was at a meeting in August 1999 in which a group of people who were trying to plan for the upcoming elections shared their view that it was absolutely impossible that the newly appointed Prime Minister, Vladimir Putin, who had been ridiculed in the press as a kind of gray mouse with no political experience, someone who had spent his entire career either in administration or in the FSB or KGB, they agreed that he had no chance whatsoever of being elected the Russian president through normal means. And at that point, Alexander Aslan, who was President Yeltsin's chief sociologist and election planner, said, and if we use non-normal means, at that point, Sevastyanov understood that something was being planned, something that was known only to a very small circle, but which would change the course of history. Several weeks later, buildings in Russia began to be blown up in the middle of the night. In Moscow, Buynaksk, Volgodonsk, people were killed as they slept, and there was a nationwide panic. The gray mouse suddenly became a national hero. He was now the defender of the Russian people who had been attacked as they slept by perfidious terrorists. He vowed that he would destroy the terrorists even in their outhouses, as he said. He was on television literally nonstop, there was no television broadcast that was not full of Vladimir Putin. And his electoral rating, which had been 2% in August 1999, rose to the point where he was the leading candidate for president. A war was launched against the breakaway Republic of Chechnya. Putin was put in charge of that war, and he was successfully elected Russian president. He's been in power ever since. And yet, there were doubts about those bombings. For one thing, the rubble was cleared, including human remains, before anyone could examine them. And in fact, as some of you may know, it was through a meticulous examination of the rubble of the American embassies in Tanzania and Kenya that it was possible to determine that that was the work of Al-Qaeda, and also to arrest some of the people who were responsible. And it was clear to those who were following what was going on that the reason why they were not curious to investigate the rubble, not willing to wait for the human remains to be removed, is because they already knew who blew up the buildings. A fifth bomb was placed in a building in the city of Ryazan, southeast of Moscow. And it was discovered before it could go off. And the people who put the bomb in the building were also discovered, and they were, because there was a huge dragnet in the city of Ryazan. Turned out to be not Chechen terrorists, but officers of the FSB. Since then, there has been overwhelming and incontrovertible evidence that Putin came to power through an act of terror against his own people, carefully plotted, and at a cost of 300 lives. Had the bomb in Ryazan gone off, there would have been 800 more dead. because the building that would have been blown up had 400 residents, and it was next to a building that would have been hit with the force of an avalanche, and also had 400 people. In any case, it was sufficient for them, the 4 buildings that were blown up were sufficient to start the war, and Putin became president. As we know, he's been in power ever since. I have been trying ever since 1999 to call attention to these bombings and their true authorship. Because someone who was willing to carry out an act of terror against people who chosen at random, who many of whom may have even been supporters of Putin simply in order to take power, was someone who was capable of any crime. And we're seeing the kinds of crimes that he's capable, not just the crimes committed against Ukrainians, although those are horrific enough, but the mass slaughter of Russians who are effectively bribed or pressured into taking part in a mercenary army that's being killed under conditions that are reminiscent of the First World War and the First Battle of the Somme. But this is not the point here, and that it's so fundamental, and which Americans often miss, is that Ukraine doesn't want to be part of this mentality. This was the mentality of the Holodomor, when Stalin decided that a mass famine was worth it in order to completely subordinate agriculture. And the death toll in Ukraine was about 3.5 million people. It's a view of the human being, not as an individual, but as simple raw material that can be disposed of without limit for the objectives of those in power. And there were other examples. The shooting down of the Malaysian airliner MH17. Russian propaganda was very successful in diverting attention from the fact that this was a deliberate Russian destruction of an international civilian airliner. By using disinformation to create the impression that it was an accidental act carried out by the rebels in the Russian-occupied areas. In fact, as video has shown, it was a Russian unit that traveled from Kursk to the area in which, under an international, a very highly frequented international air corridor, waited 20 minutes, fired a single shot, and then left. The campaign in the Russian social media and in the Russian media to the effect that this was carried out, that this was shot by accident, was based on a communication in the Russian, by the Russian so-called defense minister of the Donetsk Republic, to the effect that we shot down a plane by accident. He was interviewed years later and said he never said anything of the kind, and in fact didn't even have a Twitter account. But the final example, and one that should really be relevant now, and must not be forgotten by Americans who think that we don't have any stake in this. President Zelensky was attacked by President Trump when he said that there's a danger to the United States in his famous meeting in the Oval Office. It was that remark, that very truthful remark, that set up the confrontation and the shouting match in the Oval Office. But President Zelensky may well have been thinking about the case of the Steny brothers, who were responsible for the bombing of the Boston Marathon. The older of the two brothers, Tamerlan Tsarnaev, was in Russia for 6 months, was in Dagestan, the center of Islamic extremism, was under surveillance by Russian intelligence, met with two terrorists who were liquidated, and was never questioned, never stopped, and allowed without any interference to return to the United States, where a short time later he carried out the bombing of the Boston Marathon. When an American diplomat who was actually a CIA agent under diplomatic cover, received a tip to the effect that he could give them the true story of the Steny H bombing, of the Boston Marathon bombing. He was set up by Russian intelligence in a provocation, filmed and expelled from the country, and advertised, at least to the Russian press, as someone who was interfering in Russia's internal affairs. So, in effect, we have someone who has the mass killing that is taking place now is in no way an aberration. It was all foreseen by the first crime, when Putin came to power as part of a plot that involved the murder of his own innocent fellow citizens chosen at random. And ultimately, this is what Ukraine is trying to separate itself from. It's this mentality, the mentality that human beings are absolutely of no independent value, but in fact are nothing but raw material to be used in the aims of those who hold power. That's why it's so important, and this is a message that, in fact, I do honestly believe that if American public opinion becomes aware of it, they know the true facts, and it's our duty to present them, that the opposition to support for Ukraine will come to an end. And thank you.
David, thank you very much. Very well spoken, and I agree. If Vladimir Putin gains from this aggressive war, we will all Americans, all Westerners, all Ukrainians pay for that gain that he gets many times over in the future if he achieves anything. The next speaker for 5 minutes is, and work with me on the spelling here, okay? It's Michalina, I believe. Michalina is correct. And as you were reminded, she was the deputy mayor of Bucha City Council from 22 to 23 and witnessed these horrific atrocities that occurred when Russia invaded the city of Bucha in 2022, war crimes which are still being investigated by the International Criminal Court. Michalina.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. My story with Bucha was a bit strange because I was invited to this community to do digitalization. So MIT is more relevant for me, was more relevant for me that time than war crimes. But unfortunately, you should know what does it mean occupation. Because that's hard to believe that you live normal life and one day like mobile connection is disappeared and this is unnecessary device. And Russian army was shut down mobile connection first, then electricity, then water supply and gas supply. And one day you are in medieval ages when to feed yourself you have to use wooden ovens, and that's the only way how you could heat, how you could cook, and how you could survive. And that's the reality Bucha saw during 3 weeks. That was quite short period of occupation. But during 3 weeks, since the 3rd of March 2022 to the 31st of March 2022, more than 500 people were killed or died. Some of them because of starvation. And that's not the figures anymore, that's the names. If you come to Bucha, you will see near the church the temporary memorial, the wall with the names and with the dates of life of those people who were killed or died during the occupation. And the youngest was a year and a half old, and the oldest, she was more than 100 years old. At the territory of St. Andrew Church in Bucha, we had mass grave with 116 bodies exhumated when Bucha was liberated. And every killed person from that mass grave was killed from the short distance. So that was not an occasional killing, but the technology of the war, if I may say that. Putin's army came to Bucha with the experience in other places of the world. We know that exactly that some of them were in Chechnya, even in Chechnya in First and Second Chechen wars, and in Syria and other parts of the world, with that experience to use civilians to control the occupied territories. So they used private property, they parked tanks in private yards, they killed civilians and didn't allow to bury them to frighten those who stayed under the occupation not to fight against them. And that's Bucha's story, which was well known since Kiev region was liberated. What we know from that story as well, that 12 kids were killed. Most of them were trying to be evacuated together with their parents and shooted directly into the cars which were marked like kids are inside. And also we know that some of killed people, they were like, one of them, he was a theology professor who stayed in Bucha to help people as a volunteer. And he was killed while he was walking along the street to get some food and water to elderly people he looked after. The other person, he was Orthodox priest. And he was Orthodox priest from Moscow Patriarchy Church. We had that church before full-scale invasion in our region and don't have it anymore. And he was killed while helping people. So that's the technology, because the main aim of Putin is to have Ukraine without Ukrainians. So this is the genocide type of war. He needs territory without people, without us. And that's the real aim. That's why we believe that justice and international court could be the only answer on what we saw in Bucha. And that's the main message and the main request from all those families who suffered during that short but very, very harmful and like unbelievable, still unbelievable for the locals, massacre we saw as the result of that period of occupation of Kiev region. So we are inviting all our friends and everybody who is hesitating, is it real or not, to Bucha, to come and to see. If you come, you will see a nice place for living, a middle-class suburb, but that's still the place of awful war crimes were made by Russian army. And every soldier came to our land, came to Ukraine with a permission to kill civilians. And that's the most awful thing we know from Bucha story.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is Alexandra Medvedchuk. I remind you that she is a Ukrainian human rights lawyer and is director of the nonprofit Center for Civil Liberties, which received the Nobel Peace Prize in 2022. Alexandra.
For 11 years, I have been working with people who went through hell So let me assure you that people in Ukraine want peace much more than anyone else. But the problem is that Putin doesn't want peace. Putin wants to achieve his historical goal to destroy and to occupy the entire Ukraine and go further. He dreams about his legacy. He wants to forcibly restore Soviet empire. He thinks about Ukraine like as a bridge to Europe. And that is why Putin don't stop killing people. Just 5 days ago, Russian missiles hit Kryvyi Rih on the area of residential buildings near children's playground. 20 people were died, among them 9 children. The smallest child was just 3 years old. It means that this child was born under explosions of Russian missiles to the Ukrainian cities. And this child was killed because the explosions of Russian missiles to the Ukrainian cities. This is a human dimension of this bloody war which Russia has launched against Ukraine 11 years ago. And I see that this is a huge problem that we discuss natural minerals, Russia's territorial claims, geopolitical interests, but we don't speak about people. We have to raise a very complex questions. What will be with more 20,000 Ukrainian children illegally deported to Russia? These children were separated with their families, put in Russian education camps, told they're not Ukrainian, they're Russian children, their families refused from them, and they will be adopted by Russian families who will bring them up as Russians. What will be with thousands and thousands illegally detained civilians, men and women, as well as prisoners of the war, subjected to horrible torture and sexual abuse daily? I interviewed hundreds of people who survived Russian captivity. They told me how they were beaten, raped, smashed into wooden boxes, their fingers were cut, their nails were torn away, their nails were drilled, they were electrically shocked through their genitalia. One woman told me how her eye was dug out with a spoon. Knowing these details, you have a clear understanding that part of these people have a very less chances to be alive until the end of this political process. What will be with people who live in occupation in general? We speak about millions. These people live in gray zone without any tools how to protect their rights, their freedom, their property, their lives, their children, their beloved ones. Russian occupation is not just changing one state flag to another. Russian occupation means enforced disappearances, torture, rapes, denial of your identity, forcible adoption of your own children, filtration camps, and mass graves. We must return human dimension into all political process. This is our obligation. And I would like to end with a personal story. I have a friend, she's a Ukrainian journalist. She is originally from a small city which is under occupation for current moment. In her city, in her former school, every day began with a singing of Russian national anthem. It's obligatory for Ukrainian schools under occupation to start their morning like this. And all children have to sing Russian national anthem. And one child doesn't think. And the teacher asked this child, why you don't think? And the child responded, I don't know the words. But what the problem, told the teacher, go home and just learn it by heart. And next day, the teacher put this child alone on the center of the class and order this child to sing the Russian national anthem. And instead of Russian national anthem, this child started to sing Ukrainian national anthem. What I want to say with this story, that if our children be alone with occupiers, find energy and strength to resist to Russian occupation, to this bloody war which Russia has launched against Ukraine 11 years ago, we as adults have no rights to say that we don't know what has to be done. We have to fight for these children. Thank you very much, and I ask to excuse me because I have to go to airport. That is why I can't stay longer with this distinguished panel. Thank you.
Thank you for that very powerful statement. Our next speaker is Alex Drew. Drew, got it. And I remind you that he was held as prisoner of war and held hostage for 105 days. Alex.
Thank you, Ambassador Gilmore, and thank you all of you who are here today. As the ambassador mentioned, I was in captivity for 105 days, not 100 days, 105 days, because those 5 days matter. Every single day, I was repeatedly beaten. I was sleep deprived. I was starved, living primarily on moldy bread and dirty water. I was interrogated by the FSB, and by that I mean the KGB. I was electrocuted several times. When I was lucky enough to be released and came back home, I had multiple broken ribs, my sternum had separated. I had to undergo a massive jaw surgery because my entire jaw was fractured. I have significant hearing loss. I have a permanent heart condition at 42, and I have a permanent nerve damage in my hands from all the bindings. So I can tell you firsthand, Russia and Putin are guilty of war crimes and human rights violations. There are some people who see these images and hear these stories in the news and say, is that real? Can we believe it? And I always say to them, yes, it is real. You can believe it. And if you don't, come talk to me. So I know and I have witnessed what Russia and Putin are doing to Ukrainian military personnel, to Ukrainian civilians, to Ukrainian children. They are guilty of every war crime and human rights violation that you can imagine. And this was not isolated incidents. I was in 3 different locations in captivity, and this happened at one location. It wasn't one errant soldier. It wasn't one particular set of guards. This is a systemic disease in the Russian imperialist system, all the way from the lowest soldiers up to the very, very top with Putin himself. This is how they operate. And this is unacceptable. And that's really all I have to say. So thank you.
Well done, Alex, and we should remember that the Nazi era only came to a close at the time of accountability of war crime trials. So we should have to remember that as we go forward. Our final speaker is Rai Barkat, co-founder and CEO with honor of the nonprofit and political action committee that recruits, selects, and supports veterans who pledge to serve across party lines. Rai.
Thank you, Governor. Thank you all for being here, taking your time, our most precious asset, to work on the issue that matters right up there with the most important in the world, and that is the fight for democracy and freedom in Ukraine. My name is Ry Barka. I had the pleasure of serving in the Marine Corps and then went on to a career in the private sector. I started an organization called With Honor that helps to select and recruit veterans across party lines. You heard from one of them that led the bipartisan four-country caucus. He founded it, Congressman Don Bacon, who's also among the longest-serving military veterans in the U.S. Congress. In the recorded remarks that you heard from him, he had a photo to his left. That was a photo of Don visiting with us, a bipartisan congressional delegation, to Kharkiv about 7 months ago. And we went with two other members of Congress, and then two freshman members of Congress, Troy Downing, a Republican from Montana, and Herb Conaway, a medical doctor and Air Force veteran from New Jersey. They went to Kharkiv, they stood there with the frontline units, and they told them that we are going to stand strong for Ukraine. And that's what we are doing as an organization. Our mission is to fight polarization in Congress. It's not one particular issue. It just so happens that when the illegal next phase of the Russian invasion started 3 years ago, there was an amazing national asset to Ukraine who happened to be in the United States because she had a complicated pregnancy. Her name's Sasha Ustinova. She's a Ukrainian member of parliament, and she was here in Congress right before her baby was born. And she could not get a meeting for the first day of that invasion. But the veterans in Congress met with her that night for 2 hours. And they decided that we were going to be committed to the long haul for this conflict. It's obviously very difficult. There's a group of 37 that are part of this House caucus, and then there's a group of Senate allies that is led by Senator Roger Wicker and Jack Reed. Roger Wicker, of course, every day, I knew he was invited and wanted to be here. He's still wearing his Ukraine American pin. He had a primary opponent last election cycle in Mississippi. And there was one organization that came in behind him with independent expenditures. That was With Honor. And he defeated that primary opponent, and he continues to wear his Ukraine pin today, and he continues to stand strong on this issue. And he could use your support. All of the members that are standing out there, as Congressman Ritter knows, it matters when they hear from their constituents. So please, lean in, use your networks. It matters. Even when it feels bleak, it matters. And we're going to hold the line. Ry Barka from With Honor, thank you for the opportunity to be here. Keep pressing the attack.
Very good. I think that the speakers that we've given you today add a dimension to what you read in the newspapers. When you read about an army here, and an army there, and tanks destroyed here and airplanes there, you don't realize the actual atrocities and human condition that is being inflicted upon the people of Ukraine. And I remind you that it isn't just Ukraine that we're here for today. The United States of America has a stake in this, and that's why I believe that we're so glad that you're here. There are a few minutes for questions and answers to the panel. If anybody has a question, we still have a few minutes. We'll start here and then go back there. Yes, sir.
Yes, good evening. For those who haven't already met, I'm Chris Orr, defense writer for the National Interest, former Air Force officer, and proud supporter of the Remembrance Society. I suppose, by the way, Ambassador, my compliments are an interview with Rich Valdez a few days ago. I guess my question would be directed primarily at David, though I certainly welcome inputs from the other panelists. David, as you may recall, a couple of months ago, I penned an article for the National Interest talking about the Winter War, the Russo-Finnish War of 1939 to 1940. For anybody in the audience not familiar with that part of history, it was when Stalin invaded Finland. Technically, the Soviets did win the war because the Finns eventually did sue for peace. They surrendered the territory of Karela, which is about 12% of their geography. But it was very much a Pyrrhic victory for the Soviet Union. Khrushchev admitted as much that it was a huge embarrassment for the Soviet Union. They suffered horrendous casualties, including 542 confirmed kills by Finnish sniper Simo Hayek, aka the White Death. But anyways, point being, Finland is obviously still very much a free and independent democratic country this day, all these years later, and a member of NATO to boot. So Do you think the Winter War could be used as a model for Ukraine for settling this war? Why or why not? Thank you.
The only way to settle this war is to defeat Russia, because the problem here is that if any ceasefire will simply be a pause, it'll be a temporary truce. I do want to point out one thing about the Winter War, that the tactic of murdering your own people in order to use that as an excuse to start the war was used in the Winter War by Stalin, who justified his attack on Finland by saying that the Finns had attacked Soviet units, but they had been done by the Soviet army itself. The problem here is that this is a real criminal mentality, and you know, yes, they do want to restore the Soviet Union. Yes, they do want to subjugate Ukraine. But the motivating factor, the animating factor, is the drive for power and the self-interest of a small group of criminals at the top. That's just and they will not feel secure until they have prevailed. And that's why we have to make sure that they don't.
Well, there's many questions. This is very good. I might mention just very quickly that I was someplace yesterday and spoke to someone on this issue, and they made the case that this was just a defensive war, that NATO was at fault for having expanded, and that it was really nobody's fault in Russia. There's no way you can listen to these panelists and not understand that Putin is an expansionist, empire-creating war criminal. And that is what he is doing, and that is the reason for it. And these counter-arguments are all nonsense. Yes, sir, you had a question.
Yeah, former intelligence analyst Kyle Reardon, Washington delegation from the Action Coalition for Ukraine, or Action Summit. To what ends do you believe the current administration may be played by Putin? This idea of Nova Russia, this old idea of restoring the imperialist values of Russia. To what ends do you panelists and you experts believe that this will not last and will not bring an enduring peace that America wants? To what extent will this maybe even make a joke of the next new administration, just as perhaps in previous ones?
Panelists, who would like to answer that?
Can I add? The reason why I said Russia has to be defeated is because war is now an instrument of Russia's domestic policy. War is the way in which the Russian leaders unite the population around a corrupt leadership. The only thing that they can't do without war, because it will immediately destabilize their hold on power. Therefore, they have to be defeated.
Let me add that Russia is an empire itself now. So when we are talking about defeating Russia, it might be collapse of Russia as Soviet Union collapsed, because without these outside enemies they're creating from independent countries, they don't have the idea to unite the country itself, and that's the reality. So Russia will fall down if they don't have enemies they're creating now.
Alice or Ryan, do you have anything to add? Without that, I would just simply say, if I were advising, and I'm not, but if I were advising, I would say that in these negotiations, always look to the goals of the parties involved. And the goal, clearly, of the Ukrainians is to survive and survive as a country. The goal of Vladimir Putin is to conquer and murder and commit atrocities, which sets the standard for the next century. I'll come here and then I'll come back there. Yes, sir.
Very quickly, John Suarez, Center for a Free Cuba. The European Union is providing development aid to Cuba, and Cuba has hundreds or thousands of soldiers fighting for Russia and Ukraine, in addition to engaging in a propaganda campaign throughout Latin America, translating Russian propaganda into Spanish. Is there anything that can be done to challenge European Union's subsidies of allies of Putin in the current conflict? Thank you.
Any panelists wish to address that?
mean, I'm not an expert on foreign policy by any means, but I think you can see, as you mentioned, Cuba, we know North Korean soldiers, we know Chinese soldiers, we know so many nations are already involved on the side of Russia. Whether we want to admit it or not, this is currently a world war. It is already a world war.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much. Dr. Oliver, California delegate of the American Coalition for Ukraine. I wanted you to please be more granular, because we do hear the language of Russia must be defeated. But frankly, my understanding of that is Putin must be removed. How does one remove Putin when he is so very effective in eliminating his opposition within his borders, and certainly doesn't recognize borders in his campaign to eliminate opponents? He has multiple leverage, radiation poisoning, assassination, available windows and so forth.
Putin can be removed, in the event of a Russian defeat, the conditions will be created for Putin's removal. And of course it's possible that something could, in the absence of a defeat, he would be replaced by someone who very likely would pursue the same policies. But if Russia is defeated, and defeated decisively, you must understand the role of defeat in Russian history. Defeat has actually been an important factor in every positive development in Russian history for more than the last 2 centuries. The defeat in the Crimean War led to the freeing of the slaves. The defeat in the Russo-Japanese War led to Russia's first parliament and its first constitution. The end of the Cold War led to the defeat, basically defeat in the Cold War, led to the end of the communist system. Defeat in this war could set in motion changes in Russia that would be actually very, very positive, and almost certainly would lead to the removal of Putin.
Anyone else wish to add?
Just, I'd like to add that you do raise a good point, that if Putin is replaced internally, it could very possibly be someone worse. Prigozhin tried, and he would have been far, far worse. I think we have to realize that it's called the Russian Federation, but it is just the Soviet Union. And I think if we can make enough of an impact on Moscow, that the rest of the Federation would realize what's going on, and the Federation as a whole might have an internal rising up. And I think that's the best way to defeat the regime.
I would take note of the theme of Russian inevitability in this war seems to have been taking hold in Washington, D.C. That's not true at all. Remember, Russia was defeated in Afghanistan, and they can be defeated again in a much more powerful situation such as this one. Next question. I'll come here and then there. Yes.
Hi, David Finney. I'm a journalist. I'm curious and
Speak up.
I'm curious in knowing what your impression is of Woodcock's statements about Putin being a nice guy and giving paintings and going to church, and about Trump's negotiations right now.
Everybody hear that? Everybody heard that question?
In terms of Woodcock's comment, he needs to come talk to me.
I'd like to just add something. We should understand the mechanism of Russian disinformation. The point of Russian disinformation is to make sure that people miss the point. In other words, if the discussion is about the war between Russia and Ukraine, they want people to concentrate on Russia as a defender of traditional values because they don't like gay marriage. This was the same thing that happened during the Cold War, when people were asked to believe that the West was threatening Russia's 10,000 tanks with its anti-tank weapons. And people were ready to believe this because Russia was the champion of the world national liberation movement. The idea is to get people thinking about all the wrong and irrelevant things, and then they'll be softened up sufficiently in order to believe whatever nonsense is conveyed to them. This is why the conservatives in the US who support Russia, that movement began with people coming in and representing a supposed pro-gun lobby in the US, in Russia, and establishing contacts with the NRA in this country. Therefore, it had nothing to do with foreign relations, but it was a way of establishing the idea that, you know, we're like you should believe us, you should, you know, we think the way you think. Unfortunately, it's proven very effective because people are superficial. I've seen, you know, over the years, I've seen the level of superficiality of Americans in dealing with Russia is simply hair-raising at times, but nothing compares to what we're seeing now. And and I think this is because the administration has an agenda, and dealing seriously with the most serious issue in the world is just something that they don't have the energy for, but they're going to be forced to.
We're
Let
almost,
me
oh, go ahead, please.
Let me add and remind one thing, that we have like 11th year of the war. At the beginning of the war, when Putin took his tanks to Crimea, he was pretending it was not him. He was commenting, look, you could buy a tank in a supermarket. And that's kind of tanks came to Crimea. And do you remember that green soldiers, like a known army, entered Ukrainian independent territory, and the world believed in that words. So words could be different, but we know the reality. We know that war is real. We know that every day kids are dying, that civilians are under the attack and they are killing, and that's not possible to stop without punishing a main person who started that.
We intended to conclude at 5, but we have one last question. Yes, sir.
Yeah, Howard Marks, a former colleague of David Satter. So I have my question to David. You mentioned about the shooting down of the Malaysian aircraft.
Yeah.
So in 1984, as you remember, Soviet MiGs shot down KL, Korean airliner 007, that killed 278 people,
Including the U.S. Congressman.
Congressman McDonald, Larry McDonald. So, you know, that sort of behavior was repeated. But my question to you in the short time we have left, having lived in the Soviet Union, have seen the Red Army probably at its zenith, at its strongest moments during the height of the Cold War, what is your assessment, David, of this Russian army today? And you know, how does it compare with 30 years ago, example?
This is a mercenary army. This is not an effective army in normal terms, but it has one huge advantage over any Western army, which is that the Russians are willing simply to, as I think Lloyd Austin said, to just throw soldiers into a wood chipper. They have absolutely no regard for human life and no regard for the life of their soldiers. And this comes to the whole question of deterrence, because if the West is not willing to spend money to defend Ukraine, are we going to spend lives to defend Estonia, facing an army that may be incompetent by comparison with NATO, but is ready to sacrifice as many lives as it takes to inflict damage on the West? We don't want to be in that position. That's why, you know, it's absolutely in our interest to give the Ukrainians everything that they need to deal with this danger. You know, these are human waves, and they will be. And unfortunately, given the psychology of the country, and given the psychology of the leadership, there's no end in sight unless they're defeated militarily.
David, thank you very much, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I'm now going to call on Congressman Ritter to report you to the press conference.
Well, I think that That was an excellent panel, and I want to thank everybody for coming. I want to encourage you to be in touch with us at the Remembrance Society. We'd like to work with all of you. We will continue our work on this subject matter in particular. This is a launching phase of defining Vladimir Putin as an arch enemy of the American people and beyond. And to do this, we will take this show on the road and create events and opportunities to define Putin. Putin is not the defender of family values, and he is a war criminal, and his being is bathed in blood. And the sooner that the American people understand that sooner they understand who the negotiating partner is with the West, the better. And I want to, again, thank our panelists. They were excellent. Rye, I want you to get this message back to Senator Wicker of what we're trying to do here, because we miss him today, but we feel comfortable that he is in the United States Senate, that he is the chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee and the chairman of the Congressional Helsinki Commission. So thank you, thanks everybody. Oh yeah, one more comment. David Satter. If you listen to David Satter, you have listened to the most unique voice on Russia, the Soviet Union, the history of communism, and he is the leader of the curriculum we're developing that's going nationwide and global. Yeah.